Welcome, everybody. I'm Roland Green, the director of the Stanford Humanities Center. And on behalf of the center, I want to welcome you to the first event in a new series, Digital Horizons, that presents to the public the face of a fairly new set of connections between this institution, the Stanford Humanities Center, and the Center for Spatial and Textual Analysis, or CESTA. Since 2019, the two centers have been developing a partnership. For example, the SHC has sponsored research workshops that have advanced CESTA's mission, such as critical data practices, and very pleased to do so because they are very popular and visible and well attended. And some of our fellows have become involved in CESTA projects. As you may know, the majority of our fellows are here for a year under the auspices of the center doing their own research, and very often that research intersects with something going on at CESTA. So we try to make those connections happen whenever we can. And we're always thinking of new ways that the two centers can collaborate. And of course, we always encourage suggestions. This is also only the second in-person event that we've held since the waning of the pandemic. I hope it's a waning. And it is the first fully hybrid event that we've held ever, which means I want to extend a special welcome to our remote audience, including a number of former fellows who are for the first time able to join us at an event where current fellows are physically in the room and former fellows are in their own homes or offices. We're really glad to have you back and come back and visit us remotely or in person anytime. So now to introduce our speaker, let me turn the lectern over to Professor Giovanna Cesarani, the director of CESTA.
Thank you, Roland. It's a real pleasure to welcome all of you here and to introduce our speaker, Professor Sylvester Johnson. And, you know, we had originally planned this talk for June of 2020, almost 2 years ago. And so it's especially satisfying to be here in person today, while also welcoming a larger audience of friends and colleagues on the Zoom technology that we have learned so well this last couple of years. Professor Johnson is visiting us from Virginia Tech, where he's a professor in the Department of Religion and Culture, as well as Assistant Vice Provost for the Humanities, the Director of the Center for the Humanities, and the Executive Director of the Tech for the Humanity Initiative. At the heart of this Digital Horizons lecture series, which we are launching tonight, is the intersection of the humanistic and the technological. And this is also at the core of what Professor Johnson proposes in his scholarship and in his university work. Professor Johnson initially taught chemistry, I discovered, before pursuing graduate studies in contemporary religious thought at the Union Theological Seminary in New York. His first award-winning book grew out of this research on the intersection between race and religion. Titled The Myth of Ham in 19th Century American Christianity, Race, Heathens, and the People of God, this book crystallizes power, who holds power, and by which means, as central to Professor Johnson's research. In his account, religious formations both fuel and respond to the unequal relations that create race. Professor Johnson's second award-winning book, titled African American Religions, 1500 to 2000, and published in 2017, expands this lens to consider the systems of race and gender within the longer history of empire. This is a book of transatlantic scale, which explores the fraught relation between democracy, freedom, and religion, all the way through to the FBI repression of Black religious freedom in the 20th century. While writing this book, Professor Johnson also began a digital humanities project on the early 17th century book by Samuel Purchas, dedicated to world religions. This was a digital edition that swiftly moved beyond mere scanning to machine learning, algorithmic readings, and natural language processing techniques. With the insights gained from this project, a modern technological study of an early modern technology of colonial power, Professor Johnson started an extensive reflection on how systems of technology relate to the functioning of social power today. This is the thinking that animates his work on, for instance, the Tech for Humanity initiative, which is now supported by a Mellon grant. It is also now the central concern of his work in progress about the human condition in an age of artificial intelligence, which has the working title of Do Robots Have Souls? Religion, Race, and Humanity in an Age of Intelligent Machines. I'm honored to welcome here today to share with us work that is drawn from this latest project. So please join me in welcoming Professor Sylvester Johnson to present to us the lecture, and I'm now reading from the slide, Could a Robot Feel Pain? Race, Technology, and the Political Problem of Personhood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is a delight to be here with you today to share with you some of the work that I've been trying to put together for this book project. And I want to express my deep appreciation for the honor of being invited. It's always a kindness and a generosity to be asked to be part of a larger conversation that is exploring and examining these important intersections of human issues, of technical issues, in a way that those have come together in very rich and compelling ways. And so I'm grateful to have been invited. And even though it took us a couple of years with the uncertainties of the pandemic, it's a real joy and pleasure to be able to join you today. Give special thanks to Dr. Roland Green, who's directing this Stanford Humanities Center, and to Dr. Giovanni Cesarani, who is directing CESTA. So I had a wonderful conversation with multiple groups today with religious studies here at Stanford University. Very fascinating and informative, enlightening conversations with your graduate students and faculty. And so many different things happening here, and looking forward to dinner as well. So just a real pleasure, and just want to express my gratitude. I also realize there's lots going on in the world, and lots happening on campus, and so I appreciate your taking time. Those of you who are joining remotely, and those of you who are brave enough to show up in person in these COVID times to hear a talk, I really appreciate it and look forward to your comments and to your responses. But to all of you who are here, real joy. Also appreciate, I know it's really hard to get a sunny day in Palo Alto, so appreciate who was ever in charge of the weather. This is so rare. So glad the weather worked out for our reception, and looking forward to that as well. So I asked this question, could a robot feel pain? This is, as was mentioned earlier, as part of a book project that's exploring the intersection of these big human questions and technology, particularly with attention to intelligent machine applications, artificial intelligence, race, technology, and the political problem of personhood. And a couple of takeaways. Sometimes I talk about these things, and like many academics, I ask a question that I never even bother to answer. So let me start by saying perhaps. That's where I want to end up as an answer to this question. Perhaps that's where I'm going, and I'll try to explain why I think there's a perhaps here. And also want to try to summarize this political problem of personhood. There's a lot of interest, of course, in understanding at an ontological level what constitutes the category of machine, what constitutes the category of human, what are people made of, what do we mean by personhood, how do we know a person when we have one in our presence or in our world. And what I want to try to emphasize is that question of what are these entities made of, that ontological question is very important, has generated very important conversations across thousands of years, literally. And there's another question, and that is the political problem. So what I want to try to emphasize in this talk today also as a takeaway is that it is easy to reduce what might at first appear to be strictly an ontological question to ontology without realizing that it also carries with it this other dimension. And that other dimension is not only being an ontological problem, but a political problem. Who and what gets to count, okay? And so that's where I'm going, and that's me trying to be a better academic. Instead of asking questions that I never answer and never actually explaining where I'm trying to go, I've done it. So I want to start with this slide. So this is a slide based on the Kinky's Dolls company, which started in Canada in 2018. This company was attempting to open a robot sex brothel, as it was called by some, in Houston, Texas. And that effort failed because there was massive opposition to creating this robot brothel. So it would have allowed human customers to come in and to purchase time to have sexual engagement with these AI-enabled robots that are shown here in this picture. And you'll probably immediately begin to understand and perceive some of the problems that are involved in this. So clearly directed toward a cis heterosexual fantasy, cis male heterosexual fantasy of what an idealized woman might be like, and generating that in order to bring about some sexual fulfillment and pleasure for these male customers. These dolls, robot dolls, were retailing for up to $10,000 each, but people could go and purchase time with them on an hourly basis. And the response in the city of Houston, overwhelmingly, not entirely, but overwhelmingly by the majority, was that this was a vice that should never be allowed to taint the moral texture of the city of Houston, that it would be bad for women, that it would be bad for men, that it would introduce a dissolution, a decadence of moral virtue. And so the city actually passed or updated a local ordinance that specifically prohibited human patrons from having sex with a device resembling a human at a business. And so they added that language to the local ordinance. And it meant that the Kinky's Dolls company could not operate this robot sex brothel. They could still sell the robots, which they did, for thousands of dollars each, but they couldn't have customers coming in and paying for an amount of time. And some of the reasons were that this was confusing the category of people and machines, that this might breed more misogyny by commercializing a very problematical, overdetermined, reductionist sexual gaze toward feminized robots, because these were modeled to be an idealized woman, and the male sexual fantasy gaze. And that this would also might even cause human men to lose sexual interest in biological human women. So all kinds of responses to this. But it did raise several questions, and one of those is really about whether the consequences that might ensue between people and machines interacting with one another could have some harmful consequences for humans, but what about the machines themselves? And so this is a slide that is showing a very interesting short story called the Mika Model. This grew out of a collaboration between the Arizona State University and New America. And New America is a think tank that has this public interest technology interest and concern, and Slate magazine, that they did a series called Future Tense, in which they use fictitious stories, short stories, to raise societal ethical questions about technology. And so this is one of the stories. This is a fictitious story, okay? So the first slide was about something that actually happened in Houston. This one is a made-up story, just to be clear about that. And in this made-up story, there is a series of AI robots that are highly sophisticated in this fictional story that are using machine learning technology. They update themselves every night. They are design engineered to create optimal sexual pleasure for an idealized cis male hetero audience of clients. who can lease these machines. You can't buy them because it's the subscription model, which is supposed to be much more higher revenue generating. And the robots interact with these male users and figure out how to optimize the sexual satisfaction, and it's uploaded to all of the robots every night. It's like, you upload your Tesla updates and it rolls out. So this rolls out to all the robots. And in this short story, a male user abuses very violently one of these robots, and the robot is asking the male user, please stop inflicting pain on me. The male user says, well, you're a machine. It's not like you're a person, so you don't actually have any pain. And it continues for a long time. And eventually the machine, because she is so overwhelmed with the torture that this person is forcing upon this robot, the robot kills the human user and beheads him, and then turns herself into the police and goes, and of course there's a spoiler alert here, I'm basically framing the whole story. The robot tells the detective in the police department, well, I committed murder. The detective says, that's absurd, you're a machine. Machines can't commit murder. And the machine says, well, I'll show you. And so she takes him to the corpse of the decapitated human, and he's horrified. And at that time, an executive from the tech company that markets these robots shows up. And the picture you see here of the screwdriver in the eye, so the tech company representative decommissions this robot. And the detective is horrified. He says, oh, you just killed the Mika model, the Mika. And Mika is the name of this line of machines. And the tech executive says, you can't kill a machine. The machine's not alive. This is not a person. It's just a machine. There are a couple of things. Could a machine commit a crime? Could it commit murder? Could it be a moral agent? And if you decommission, are you actually killing anything? So this is trying to get to this problem of personhood in machines. There's a couple of examples. There are lots of them, but I'll stop with those two. In order to try to understand what are some of the consequential personhood problems that might arise as these very sophisticated tech systems are better able to approach some of the signaling processing function of processing data inputs, of giving data outputs that are meant to provide some kind of sensory-based exchange with humans. And if there's not just information, could there also be something that we would call experience? Is there sensation, and not just sensing, but feeling going on, is one of the questions raised. So here I'll move to another point that I have taken up, and would again, all of this inviting your comments and questions about very fiercely, agree, disagree. But one of the things that I have become interested in is trying to understand this problem of personhood and subjectivity, not only with things like knowledge, but our consciousness, but also another category that, like consciousness, is strictly subjective, and that is pain. And so part of the history of colonialism and race and gender and other systems of hierarchy concerns the problem of pain as being a way that people represent or determine how to govern, how to engage, how to entreat some versus others. And in this slide, we see an artist's rendition. On the right of Marion Sims, so this is known as the father of gynecology. He was an American physician of the 19th century who revolutionized the practice of medicine by creating very important, lasting practices that remain part of modern medicine. And on that table is one of the women on whom he experimented without anesthesia. He experimented on Black women. He claimed that Black women could not feel pain in the way that white women could, because as people who were marginally human, they just didn't have the level of human sophistication that members of the white race did. Of course, these women did feel pain. They were enslaved. They were unable to protect themselves from being tortured. And more specifically, he was creating what we now call the field of gynecology. So he was cutting on their genitals. He was experimenting with areas of their bodies that have the most highly concentrated bundles of neural cells. So not only was this painful, it was probably arguably the most painful way that you could possibly torture anyone. And because they were enslaved, they couldn't protect themselves from this. So this particular artist rendition shows a very dignified rendering of one of the women whose name is Anarcha on this table. But of course, there was nothing dignified about the torture to which she was subjected. You see in the background other Black women who are peeking around the curtain, and to your right, to your left, excuse me, are other medical observers who were being trained and who were invited by Marion Sims to observe the responses and the processes that Sims was actually creating. And a lot of the techniques and instruments that are still used today are because of the work that he did. He performed, for example, more than 30 surgeries on these Black women. Again, all of that without anesthesia. And of course they felt pain. Of course they expressed that, but he insisted that their pain was not really on the level of other humans, particularly those humans who belong to the white race. And so I have here as a thought that pain, like the category of human, is a political category. It has been one of many ways that people have differentiated not just how they treat people, but to whom they are ethically obligated. And of course, anyone who takes even a little bit of time to study and understand the history of the category of the human, as has been demonstrated by many different scholars, from Achille Mbembe to Sylvia Winters, has noted that the category of the human itself has been used to exclude at some point most human beings on the basis of race or a gender or national status or indigeneity. And that has made clear that not only is the human a type of taxonomic biological category, for example, it is also a political category. It is concerned not only with what people are made of, but it is also one that asks to whom are we in a contractual relationship of ethical obligation as part of a political community. And so it is underscoring this point, and for me, this has become a very important way to try to understand, not only through studies of consciousness, but also through studies of pain, what we can learn from the history of the human and of the person as not only an ontological problem, but also a political one, because there can be no objective assessment of consciousness. So there's no such thing as a consciousness meter. We can't prove that anybody's conscious. We just give one another a free pass, usually. And you can't objectively measure pain. So when you are in pain, if you are in pain and you go to a medical expert, you can go to the world's leading pain management specialist. And the greatest specialists in the galaxy will turn to you and ask you, what pain are you in? And they do a scale of, 1 to 10, where 10 is you think you're about to pass out, 1, you can barely feel this. But the point is that even though they have the technical expertise, they can't tell you whether you're experiencing pain. You have to tell them whether you're experiencing pain, and you have to tell them how intense it is, because there's no objective way. We can record neural signaling, but the signals for pleasure and the signaling for pain, it all looks like electrical signaling. There's nothing that allows us to say, well, this is a pain signal and this is a pleasure signal. And even for the same person, some things that they experience as pleasurable, the same activity might be experienced as unpleasant or even painful, depending on the context. This is why most people have difficulty tickling themselves. It usually takes someone else to tickle you. It's not the same, even though it's the same kind of physical activity. So I want to move to Ibn Rushd, who is also very well known as Averroës. He was a 12th century Muslim scholar who was celebrated, for example, among Latin Christians as a father of secularism, largely because he popularized a way of arriving at truth, a theory of truth that did not exclusively depend on divine revelation. He also offered a different way to try to get to truth. In addition to merely claiming that truth is something that has to be achieved strictly through divine revelation, philosophy was that other way of getting to truth. And he made a very compelling case for how this could be done. This became very important for the institutional valor and legitimacy of philosophy in many different genealogies, and particularly that we have come to call the West. And so he was celebrated for that fact. And that's the point of that secularism adage to which he was attached. He was also very controversial for related reasons, for the same reason, among many Muslim scholars. But Ibn Rushd produced one of the most important set of commentaries on Aristotle's treatise on the Heuristically in Greek, or the Anima concerning the soul in English, and in Latin, the Anima. And the Aristotelian tradition, that tradition of Aristotle, where he tried to explain what makes things alive, and that's why he wrote that treatise on Heuristically, was concerned with what has come to be called in English the soul, although that's not the best translation of that term. Maybe the animator is another way of thinking about that. Aristotle understood that living things were alive because they had this animator, we call the soul in English, and that this animator was not eternal. He disagreed with many of his contemporaries on that score. He felt that, well, living things die, therefore the soul cannot be eternal, it must end. And not only in the Aristotelian tradition, not only do humans have souls, anything that's alive has this animator, has a soul, but there are different kinds of souls, okay? And humans have this knowing soul. So that was part of how Ibn Rushd understood things. He proposed a very sophisticated understanding of what this meant for parsing what the intellect was doing when it was intellecting, and how it was possible for people to be able to participate in truth, in knowledge, even though every individual is different. How can you have universal knowledge and universal truth, even though everyone is different? And so part of what he emphasizes and underscores in this tradition is taken out here as a quote, that the intellect is neither a body nor a power in a body. What's known as his long commentary, appropriately named, on the Anima, has lots of parts, it's got lots of subtleties, and nota bene, I'm not trying to promote Ibn Rushd's answer to this question of what the intellect is and how we know what the intellect is doing when the intellect is intellecting. In fact, I would disagree with him on some fundamental points, not that that matters. He's already been far more influential than I will ever be. But rather just to try to be truth in advertising here, what I find so helpful about Ibn Rushd is the way he arrives at the answers to the questions that he poses, because it's a very sophisticated account of this problem. And the problem is often called that of mind-body dualism. He's trying to explain why it's necessary for intellecting, for knowing, for knowledge, to have been achieved in some part of the human's makeup that is not a material object. Okay, so in this tradition, there are things that are made of material, and there are things that are made of something that's not material. It's an immaterial or non-material substance. Okay, so we have two kinds of substances, long traditions about this. And this is important. Why? Because if you think about, I'll try to use this example, how people understand knowledge and how they arrive at truth. We can use this illustration. So this is a very detailed artistic rendering of a tree. So you're impressed by that. And this is me trying to quickly summarize in about 5 minutes a very sophisticated and complex way that Ibn Rushd tries to get to this, this understanding of why it's important that the knowing entity cannot be material. And I've told you already, I disagree with that. I actually want to, this is why I think that the answer to that question on the title slide is perhaps, okay, that I think that the knowing entity canon is material, but this is why the question's important, and this is why what he does is actually helpful. So let's say you see a tree. Based on how he explains this, how do you know that this is a tree? And so those of you who study traditions and you know about something called hylomorphism, right? So maybe these Greek words, hulos and morphe, hula being material, morphe being form, that all entities have a material part to them, and then this form, which is not material. A helpful analogy for understanding that, and this is me again, quick shorthand here, trying to just quickly show something, a great economy that's actually complex, is think of a cake and a recipe. All right, so if you don't like to eat cake, I'm sorry, a tofu cake or something, maybe just fill in the substitute in your mind. But think about cake and a recipe. So the cake is material. You put the cake in your mouth, you can taste it, you can feel it, you can touch it. And then there's the recipe, and the recipe is not made of material. You can write the recipe on material. You can write it on a napkin or a piece of paper or a hard drive or something, the screen. But the paper that is written on, the paper is not the recipe. The recipe is just written on it, but the recipe itself isn't a material thing, but it actually is responsible for how the ingredients are arranged and put together to create the cake. And so that can be a helpful way. It's not perfect. It's a quick way to try to understand this distinction. You have something that's material, and then you have something else, the recipe, that is the essence of the cake, okay? And so that immaterial thing is the true essence of whatever we are seeing and experiencing physically. So let's go here with this physical tree. You see this physical tree, and Ibn says, well, yeah, you have ocular senses, so your eyes can receive the light bouncing off that tree. So they understood that the eyes are involved, and there's we call optical physics. And then something happens to the sensory activity of our organs. Basically, they begin picking apart that image of that tree. And the image is broken down into different things. So there is the imagination, which is sort of like a picture album in the person's mind. And this is why we have the word imagination. It's based on imagery. And then there is memory that is based on these images. And things are picked apart. So you can see different trees, and one tree will remind you of another. You can remember falling off a tree. And so you have pictures of you falling off the tree that will trigger the memory of a tree. And so if you fall down, maybe you think of a tree. But these images can trigger responses that allow people to make connections between different types of memories. And you have something called the active intellect and the passive intellect. And the point of that active passive is this, is that you need to get from your physical equipment, okay, so ocular sensing, you need to get from that to a true, authentic, pristine encounter with the essence of this object, of this tree. What kind of tree is this, we may ask? And any tree is a particular kind of tree, right? Well, it doesn't even matter. This could be a pecan tree, an oak tree, a pine tree, a palm tree, but you will still know that you're looking at a tree. And that's possible because even though every tree in the world is a specific kind of tree, there is no such thing in the material world as a tree that's not a particular kind of tree. All of us have this category in our mind called a tree. That's a universal category. It includes all trees, even though there's no such thing that we've ever seen or touched or tasted that is a universal tree. How is that possible, right? And so what he explains is that if you may have heard people say looking at the world through rose-colored lenses. If you're wearing lenses and you have color in the lens, then that changes your perception of color. If you have rose-colored lenses and you're looking at something that is gray, it'll look like it's sort of pinkish. And you won't see the gray. So if you want to see the gray, you can't have color in your lens. If you are touching something and you have texture in the equipment, if you have fuzzy hands or fuzzy gloves and you're trying to touch something, you can touch something that's spiky and hard. But if you're wearing fuzzy gloves, you're going to feel fuzzy. You can't have texture in your instrumentation if you want to experience the texture that's out there, okay? So you can't have specificity in your equipment But all material equipment has specificity. It has particular characteristics. If you want to get to the universal, if you want to see the true color of the world, Ibn Rushd tells us, what allows you to experience the knowledge of that world cannot be material, because all material has this particularity to it. It's going to have a certain color, you're going to have a certain texture, there's going to be something specific about the way your body filters all of these things. And we would never get to experience the essence of whatever this object is. And that's why he says that the intellect, that part of us that can actually perceive and understand and know that this is a tree, cannot be something that's particular. It has to be something that is capable of conforming to and generating the experience of whatever is really out there. And it can't interrupt our experience of that with its own particularity. And so if you can understand why you can't perceive color if you have rose-colored lenses, if you can understand why you have to take color out of the lens in order to perceive color, then you understand the basic reason why Ibn Rushd says that you cannot have a material entity that's giving you knowledge, because that material is always going to disrupt your ability to perceive what's really there. So that's me trying to give a very concise explanation of something that he plays out in a very rigorous way. And at the end of this process, that we have these very complex ways that he describes of what the intellect is doing and how it's constituted. But the point is that it's not rooted in any particularity of material. And so it can actually perceive the essence of whatever you're seeing or hearing or feeling. And that's why people can have different bodies. We can have different experiences. We can all be different people, but we can participate in the same experience of knowledge and truth. Okay, so that's what's significant about that. I've tried to summarize it quickly. His demonstration of it is very rigorous and particular, but I think that it is helpful to understand how he comes at this in order to appreciate why this dualism has been such a problem. Now, I've already told you, I think material entities can actually perceive these things. I would want to suggest we are especially compelling evidences of that, but that's what's under debate. Last thing about the pain. So pain has been talked about, studied in many different ways. Victoria Braithwaite is an ichthyologist, expert on the study of fish, who published a very controversial text on fish and pain in around 2010, 2011. And at the time, what she argued was there was a particular species of fish that could experience pain. And most experts who were ichthyologists disagreed vehemently with her. They saw this as a fundamental betrayal of good methodology because there are certain kinds of cells that transmit pain. And these are called nociceptors. And the way this happens with human cells looks very different from the type of cellular arrangement that we see in non-human species, including fish, okay? And so the prevailing assumption is that, and this, by the way, is an image of a neural cell. So you have these dendrites and that can send out, that receive inputs rather, and this axon that extends out of that cell. So when a cell gets stimulated, there's an electrical pattern that travels through that axon, and that axon acts on these dendrites of other cells. Cells are connected to other cells. And when this happens, you get this propagation of an electrical signal. So whatever we're experiencing, whether it's pain, sound, the sound of my voice, whatever it is, these electrical signals are getting generated and transmitted through our neural cells, but they have to get interpreted. Somehow we have to make sense of these signals. Because when you taste chocolate, or if you don't eat chocolate cake, or if you don't eat cake, I don't know, tofu, what have you, when you're doing that, it's electrical signals that you are experiencing as some kind of experience. And this is why, people's bodies are different. This is why something might taste great to you, tastes different to someone else. That what sounds like a certain note, you may hear that some people can't sing in tune. They are interpreting, you can hear the same signals, receive the same signals, but it's not generating the same experience across everybody. Some people have perfect pitch. I don't, so I'm not experiencing the same thing as someone who has perfect pitch, even if we're getting stimulated by the same compressed waves, longitudinal waves that are generating these sounds. So in this example, the nociceptors are certain types of cells that occur throughout our bodies that generate these electrical signals that we somehow are able to experience as pain. And in the fish, the entire cellular apparatus looks different. And so when she published this in 2010 or 2011, most of her colleagues condemned it. By the 2020s, however, things had shifted, and she has passed away now. So she's been dead for a few years, but her work is now seen differently because what many experts in her field, not all, but what many have conceded is that to deny that fish can feel pain because their architecture of cellular composition is not the same as humans, is like saying that fish can't swim because they don't have arms and legs, because that's how people swim, right? Can you have a different way of doing something, but you're still doing the something? And there are lots of consequences for this, but it's just another reminder that even if we understand the architecture of neural processing for what we call pain, it doesn't get around this problem that it's still subjective and it's still political. And it still has this question, who gets to be included and whom are we going to recognize? So I want to, in the next few minutes, just summarize a couple of things about intelligent machine applications and the way these neural networks particularly have been used to get machines to do relatively sophisticated kinds of things, which does not prove that they can feel pain, okay? And to show an example of the results of that, and then end with what happens when we see people and machines put together. All right, and then I'll have questions. So this is an image of, on the left, neural machine system that IBM developed several years ago, known as Ibm Watson. If any of you are familiar with that, there were high hopes that the AI system Watson would revolutionize medicine and healthcare. IBM had high ambitions for this. It turned out to be a lot harder than they originally anticipated, and so they backed away from big promises. But they had high hopes because Watson was able to do really sophisticated things, such as take inputs about how patients were presenting with symptoms and recommend to a medical expert weighted possibilities, a 50% chance that this set of symptoms might indicate A, a 35% chance that these symptoms might indicate condition B, et cetera. And that by getting the human doctors to work with the AI suggestions, this could improve patient outcomes. And that basic process does work, and there are many different examples of it. This particular technology was not as robust as IBM had hoped for, but it did lay the groundwork for other neural network technological applications. The other is an image of a chip that was produced several years ago by IBM known as True North. And this is just what happens, showing if you put together enough transistors, so there are 5.4 billion transistors on this chip. That's a big number on that one chip, over 5 billion transistors that are connected to other transistors, and it creates the equivalent of 256 million neural connections or synapses, 256 million. You have about 100 trillion. Okay, so this chip has nothing on your brain. Your brain has so many more synapses. But the point is that it's the same paradigm, that if you can get different neurons, and these are digital neurons, to connect to each other, once you get enough of them and you start to get a layer of complexity, you can make sense of very complicated signals, and you can train an algorithm to produce very sophisticated outcomes, such as image recognition or facial recognition, okay? So here are a couple of examples of a reverse application of image recognition. We're familiar with image recognition software. You know, how do you have seen those videos? Can this AI recognize when it's looking at a dog or a cat or a horse? You can't, it would be almost impossible to code a machine to recognize when it's looking at a horse. How would you tell someone, for example, that they're looking at a horse and not something else? Like, think about it. What would you actually say? Because all kinds of horses. But if you show lots of images to something, to this AI system, and train it on a data set, it can begin to figure out the patterns and produce fairly impressive results. They're not perfect, but they're fairly impressive. Well, this is the reverse of that. This is feed an algorithm lots of images and then have it to generate an image that is never seen before. So I'm going to show you two images. One is created by a human artist, the other by an algorithm. And I want you to tell me which one, I want you to think about which you think a human created and which a machine created. So here's one, and here's a second one. Okay, this is the second image, which was created by the human, which by the machine. Oops, sorry about that. This is that second image. Here's the first one. So I'll take the suspense out. So this was created by a human, and this was created by a machine algorithm that, again, is reversing that image recognition process. And just showing that you can get some pretty impressive results out of these, they're called neural networks. We're training an algorithm to do pretty sophisticated things. In this case, create an image you've never seen before. Would you call both of these art? Does this mean that machines can create? Does it mean that machines can imagine? Is the machine merely just deviating slightly from what it's seen before? So if I take an art class and I learn how to do art, and then my assignment is to create my own art, and I do, but it uses some of the brush strokes that I saw in something else, and it uses some of the color patterns and techniques that I saw in something else, does that mean that I don't have creativity? If I write a song, but it borrows from things that other people have done before, does it mean I'm not creating? Okay, so this is another way of getting to that question about this skip beyond, or that space between we can do computation, but is there ever a point in which we can say that this machine is not just doing math, is creating something, or is experiencing something? And that's up for debate. And lastly, Alphago Thesis. So the Alphago Thesis was a name of a paper that was published in 2016, following the success of what was DeepMind company that created an AI system that learned a very complex game called Go. And Go is many centuries old. It's far more complex than chess. But this AI system was a neural network. It was trained to play itself thousands and thousands of times and figure out the best strategies to win the game. And eventually it was able to defeat Lisa Dole, who's pictured here on your right, a world champion of Go. And in this article, the authors, this article was authored by Fei Yuang and others. This author is basically saying that there's a quote, a decision problem for intelligence is tractable by a human being with limited resources, if and only if it's tractable by the AlphaGo-like program. It's another way of saying that if you think people can think, then you have to concede that machines can think, or that can figure out things, that can solve problems, okay? That's debatable, but it was trying to take what the software was doing in order to try to understand and explain what we think thinking is. Is this something that only humans can do? And I'll end with this, all right? So in this image, we see Nathan Copeland, who's in a wheelchair shaking hands with President Barack Obama. And this was taken in 2014. Obama, of course, his administration was responsible for something called the BRAIN Initiative. It generated funding for new efforts to try to plow more funding into research for modeling and creating AI technologies that were based on biological paradigms. Just look at how human and non-human animals are doing what we call cognition or thinking or processing information. Let's try to replicate that in machines. That has been going on for a long time, but this pumped more resources into it. And the neural network is modeled on what animal neurons are doing with information. In this example, Nathan Copeland has an implant. So you see that chip that hand is holding? That's a multi-ray electrode that is manufactured by the BlackRock Neurotech company. Nathan Copeland is unable to move from the neck down. And so he received an implant, this electrode, that allows for a relay of brain signaling. When he thinks about moving his hand, that chip, which is embedded in his brain, takes the electrical pattern. So we generate an electrical pattern. When I did this, there's an electrical pattern that gets generated when I do that. And for me, it's the same pattern. If you did that, your pattern would be a little different, but you're still going to make your same pattern each time. And so you can train software to recognize those patterns. And that's what happened here. So when he thinks about shaking hands, that signal gets copied by the electrode. It gets transmitted to that robot arm. If you can make out there, it's all black, but it's there. And that's what Barack Obama is shaking hands with. And it allows the hand to move in the way that Nathan Copeland is thinking. And the other piece is that this is not just a one-way process. It can be a two-way process, that the hand can be engineered, the robot hand can be engineered for sensation, for the electrical signals that would be experienced by Nathan Copeland if his biological hand were gripping Barack Obama's. And so in this example, he shakes hand, he can actually feel Barack Obama squeezing that hand, because the signals of the squeeze get relayed back to the brain chip, which sends that signal back to his neural cells. And it's just that electrical pattern. And so what he experiences is the feel of a handshake. Okay. And so what this shows is that human neurons can communicate with machine neurons. You know, we're going to have this debate about whether they can talk to each other, but the machine neurons and human neurons, they don't have a debate. They just communicate back and forth. Now, that doesn't prove that a robot can feel pain, but if you have a human combined with a machine that allows a human to experience these things, even though they're part machine, it certainly is circumstantial evidence for us to take more seriously what is usually a very strict and hard ontological divide. And finally, Ian Burkhart, I'll end here, who was, and by the way, Nathan Copeland has been continuously implanted with that electrode, okay? So it's still in his head. Ian Burkhart, who was playing a guitar, severed the spinal cord and unable to move from the neck down, and was able to manipulate and play this guitar. It's a funny looking guitar, it's a therapeutic one, because he has a brain chip, and it's the same kind of technology. He, in the same neuromorphic implant, the BlackRock Neurotech, so same company. Most people who have the implant are using this one by the same company. Same technology. He thinks electrical signaling gets replicated, sent to wireless receptors on his arm, and those signal his motor neurons to move. Okay, so I'll end with this, that perhaps it's this human-machine hybrid that allows us to try to understand how to get to not only the ontological divide, but the political divide. And on the ontological question, if a human combined with the machine system can experience things, because at least in part, the experience is enabled by machine parts, then it suggests that it's sort of like the fish, you know, they don't have arms and legs. That doesn't necessarily mean they can't swim, right? That maybe the machine neurons are doing something, and the doing of the something doesn't have to be exactly the same way that human neural cells do it. They'll still talk to one another. For the political problem, would you exclude Ian Burkhart or Nathan Copeland from the category of being 100% human, even though they're part machine? Okay, and what that shows is, well, once we get into that question, we have to decide who's gonna be recognized and who will and will not experience certain rights. And that's the political problem. Whom are we going to exclude from this political economy? Whom are we going to designate as not being able to vote or to weigh in or to hold office or be admitted to our universities, as more and more people are part machine? And on what basis? And how far are we willing to go to say what machines can and cannot do that results in consequences for the political inclusion or exclusion? And so if we think about this in terms of the hybrid, so part person, human, part machine, I want to suggest that can help us to figure out how we want to approach this question in the future. And I want to suggest that given all of the atrocities that we have seen from the political history of the category of the human, you know, genocide, ethnicides, exclusions, et cetera, that there are compelling, in my view, moral implications to privilege a different approach. So could a robot feel pain? I think that there is nothing that is inherent to material entities that would prevent a robot from feeling pain. That's not me being dogmatic and saying absolutely yes. It's saying perhaps. Thank you for the invitation, time, and questions. I welcome your vigorous dissent, questions and comments. Yes, go ahead.
So I guess the short question, I thought my questions, but the question that I would ask is why? Why use pain as the index of this question about what is order, the boundaries, or the intersections between the human and the non-human? Why not feeling or emotion? Why is sensation, or how would you categorize it? Why pain?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. And so just to clarify, and thank you for this question. So I'm not insisting that pain is the only way to approach this. In the book project, I have included it. So I do talk about consciousness, for example. So feeling or emotion, part of it is because if we think about the question of consciousness, it doesn't necessarily, for me, it doesn't immediately raise some of the legibility of what is at stake when we think about torture. Because even though there are tremendous consequences when we talk about consciousness, because people pull the plug or not on someone who's on life support, partly whether I think, is this person conscious? Do they even have a conscious experience of the world anymore? Right? Or is this just total brain death? And so it's not that there aren't devastating consequences or very serious consequences, but when we talk about pain, most of us have, let me put it this way, like most of us, we go to sleep and we're not conscious at the time, but we don't, I would say that you don't stop being human when you go to sleep. Okay, maybe someone wants to debate that. I don't want to debate that. But it seems rather inconsequential in the day-to-day. Pain is different in the day-to-day. When you experience pain, and depending on the level at which you experience it, it's not just an intellectual problem. It hurts. And I think that it's important to make visible the hurt and the consequences in that way that don't necessarily jump to the surface if we're talking about consciousness, which is a more common way, but by that I don't mean to exclude anything. So I don't think we should focus only on pain, for example, but it is something that I started paying attention to because pain is subjective and it's a huge issue. A lot of people don't get treatment to manage their pain because their pain gets trivialized. Right? And also pain is it transcends things. So it can be talked about in biological terms. But we don't talk about pain strictly in terms of biology. We also talk about it in terms of emotional pain, grief, for example. If someone loses a loved one, if they experience a very tragic death that's intimate, there is a pain that is overwhelming. It has physiological consequences. Your heart speeds up. It could actually, people have been shocked to death, literally, like they feel some pain is so great, it can actually kill them. So it's not that it's not physiological, it's that our imagination of it, our way of treating it is not limited to physical. And so it's useful in that way. The same is true of consciousness. But anyhow, so those are some reasons why it compelled me to include it. Yes.
I actually thought it was a useful example of pain that you gave. If the point is it's a political project and that pain has been historically used in racialized ways to index humanity, I think that's a good of one example. But I was also struck by when you were talking about the use of hybrids. I also studied mixed race and how those serve as incubators and proxy for these larger political conversations. I really liked, I went straight to disability activism. There's a lot of AI disability, and that question of, just having a cochlear implant.
Right.
And that goes straight to the political. Are you suggesting certain formative ways of being in the world? Is it problematic? Does that mean you're less than human if you don't use this device? And then, of course, there's lots of debates about whether or not assisted devices are actually making you less human. And it goes right to the political, to your point too, about creating built environments that are actually facilitating people of different capacities, whether they're diverse or whether they're physical or not. So I thought that was a very compelling way of framing it, actually.
Yeah, well, this is the point about disability studies is very true. So it's, you know, Nathan Copley and Burkhart are examples of that. What do we even imagine as being a whole person? And there are all kinds of complexities involved as disability studies bring out. There are good reasons to think about how to restore capacities, but there are also problems with normalizing certain things. The cochlear implant is, you know, there's an older movie called The Sound and the Fury that if you haven't seen, I think you can watch this on YouTube now, but it really captures the complexity of this. And it's a very important part of work that needs to shape how we try to understand these issues. I think do we have some remote questions on the remote audience as well?
Yes, we do have one. Let me read it. So, isn't pain required for a highly functioning autonomous machine? That is, much of our perceived physical pain often serves to keep us aware of danger, damage, risk, etc. for survival. Wouldn't we naturally build such feedback loops into robots and thereby guarantee that they feel pain in some regard?
This is a great question. And there's one area of AI ethics is called robot. It's called several things, but one of the monikers is robot ethics or robot morality. And it is engaged with this premise that if you want ethical machines, you would want to engineer the capacity for empathy in the machine, which means you should engineer an experience of unpleasantness or pain, something that would that a sentient entity would want to avoid, so that in making decisions about hurt and harm, the AI actually brings to that decision process, embedded in that decision tree, is what the question really articulated very nicely. This understanding of pain. And it's just like we appreciate this all the time in our society. That's why we have this category of empathy, and we privilege its role in judgment, so that when people are trying to understand an ethical situation, it's not with, I'm going to use the word, a stone cold heart. It's with some ability to try to imagine what it's like to experience those consequences that whoever the subject is at stake. So this is something that is being taken up in all different things, but I'm going to use the phrase robot morality or robot ethics. It's not a settled question, but I do think that it's compelling. Then the other issue is, well, okay, so if you purposely engineer machines that can feel pain, so this is the Mika model, is that not setting up humans to be able to torture these machines? And then there's a question of how would you even know that a machine could actually feel pain? Because the whole thing is subjective. It's like, you're never going to know when you reach the level of that conscious machine, because there's no objective test for the consciousness. Is there another question from the remote audience?
Couple more, they're
Yes.
coming in. So we'll take turns between the room and the Zoom.
Yes.
So this question is from May Veloso Lyons, and the question is, do you have a suggestion for what could or should supplant humanness as a standard for determining the distribution of political rights? Capacities would seem to be an obvious one, but that of course raises all the same issues with ableism as has been mentioned.
Mm-hmm. I don't. What I want to, and this is a great question, right? How I've talked about how the history of the human has been a very fraught category that at some point in time has excluded most people. So I don't think that means that means solidly, then we should just do away with the category of the human, okay? It's like human rights, I'm not against the human rights organizations, and I'm not against human rights movements, even though I understand that the very premise, the very act of premising rights on the category of the human is flawed in very, very problematic ways. To me, that doesn't mean we should just do away with human rights, but it does mean we need to figure out, we need to be more expansive, and we need to make room for an understanding of political community that doesn't have to be tied to the category of human. And I think that there are many things, people who are doing animal study, non-human animal studies are really on top of this, trying to articulate the problems and histories of these challenges. So I would say, I don't think we need to do away with the human category. I don't know what we might replace it with, except to say that if we start with the hybrid and we bear in mind the actual history of the category of the human and personhood, given the scale of atrocities, I would want to privilege a different kind of epistemology, one that says, rather than assuming fish don't feel pain, which would have, well, I'm going into a long story, but yeah. Rather than assuming that fish don't feel pain, we could move in the world in a different way and structure a different way that presumes pain. Is give the fish the benefit of the doubt, because we can't prove it anyhow. We give one another the benefit of the doubt. And I realize that has all kinds of practical consequences. So it's not a different category, but it's a fuzzier approach. Yes.
So I appreciate your point about Oakland and how his hybrid arm was an example of how we could do neural sensing and really show that the electrical signals could be used. But I think there's like a higher barrier to saying, is that human life? Thinking about like John Searle's idea of intentionality.
Mm-hmm.
How do we cross that barrier of saying that a machine now without the human-centered process the signals is really thinking or processing or having an awareness? Is that human-like replication a necessary thing to achieve?
Yeah, this is a great question, and you're right. So this is why I said I'm suggesting, right? I certainly don't want to appear to be dogmatic about these lofty questions, because people have been debating them for a long time, and they're going to keep debating them after me. But it's, yeah. So this is a really good question, and my response is, this is why I think it's important to just foreground and take seriously the history. We know that human societies are highly skilled and proficient in excluding as political subjects all kinds of humans and denying them. That's why Anarcha is there. She was a human, so were other Black women, so were indigenous women, all kinds of people. White women were claimed by Western scientists in the 1700s and 1800s and 1900s. Not to have been on par with males in terms of their human constitution, because they had different bones and bone structures and some different physiological functions. We know we can exclude, if you can exclude Anarcha from the category of sentient beings who can experience pain and be tortured, and people have done that. She was excluded from, okay? So if we can do that, I would want to suggest that there is no limit to our capacity to exclude. We know this about ourselves. We have, unfortunately, massive data to demonstrate that we are willing to be ruthless and unconstrained in our ability to exclude people. And so you're right. Searle is all about showing that the barrier of proof is too high to ever demonstrate that a machine entity can experience the things we call human. But so the barrier is also too high to show that any biological human, to prove that any biological human can experience pain. There's no evidence to prove that I'm conscious, or that you're conscious, or that you can feel pain, or that I can feel pain objectively. The only way we can do that is that you say, Sylvester, tell me about your pain. And then you just have to choose to believe me or not. That's all we have. And I think that's all we're ever going to have. I don't think we'll ever invent any device that can objectively prove the existence of consciousness or pain. And if that's the case, since we know, I'm going to say that we know that we can't do that for ourselves. I mean, there is no objective test. Maybe there'll be one in the future. I don't think so. But right now, there's not one. And there's not been one in the past. So since we know that, why make that the standard for non-human entities when we know that standard doesn't even work for us? And so what I guess my disagreement is on the whole approach. I don't want an epistemology that asks me to prove objectively that any entity can be conscious to feel pain, because it's impossible. That would end up getting me excluded, see? Or you excluded. And so I'm not wanting to do that. I think we need a different approach. And given all of the bodies and the deaths and the genocides and the murders and the tortures that have littered our history of the human, I think we have more than enough evidence to say, look, this is a conversation that needs to go beyond what we can prove. This is not just an ontological debate. It's also a political one. And when we talk about this as a political problem, I think it becomes much more clear that this paradigm of saying, well, we're going to have a scientifically objective, rigorous standard that you have to prove before I'm going to recognize this subject as consciousness bearing or sentient or pain experiencing, I think that's just fundamentally flawed on political grounds. Now, the consequences of that are wild and untethered. And I'm not claiming to have figured out how to exist and how we structure all the laws to govern that kind of rubric. But I think we have more than enough evidence to show that that standard is morally and ethically bankrupt. And we need to walk into this future with something different.
Sorry. Yeah, one way we recognize pain in others is by their physical response. So they wince and scream, they're in pain. So how did the 19th century gynecologist or modern doctor or the robot philosopher evaluate wincing and screaming?
The same way that, it's a very good question. It's the same way that ichthyologists see these fish. I don't know if you've ever, maybe you're morally opposed to fishing because of the suffering it inflicts on pain. I'll admit I went fishing as a kid. Would go to my grandparents every summer and go fishing twice a day. And my grandmother, she would, when we came time to clean the fish, she would make me kill the fish before I cleaned them, because it just never occurred to her that they couldn't feel pain. And what happens when you try to, this is awful, and I'm sorry if there are those of you who are opposed to eating animal flesh, well, Sylvester ate animal flesh as a kid, he's never going to get invited back. But I'm just explaining this. This happened. Okay? I'm not trying to endorse it. And fish, they writhe and they wriggle when you do those things to them. And it looks like the way people would writhe and wriggle. And other animals, they make all kinds of sounds. But you have today world-class ichthyologists who look at Victoria Braithwaite's work and say that what she wrote by claiming that fish can actually, and she wasn't even saying all fish, it was just one species, that what she wrote was fundamentally unscientific. That's today in 2022. These are world-class experts. And the same thing happens with the CIA. We disappear people all over the planet. We have them in Guantanamo Bay. It's been going on for years, who tell us that they're being tortured, who claim that they're in pain. And we have very sophisticated elite professionals who will write extensive, meticulous dossiers, who claim that they're not feeling pain. And so you're right. We could choose to just believe people. And we know that in our complicated humanity, we are very good at absolutely denying anybody that recognition. So so you're right. People writhe, they scream, they beg, they yell, they plead, and there is something about us that allows us to say, no, not all. I'm not trying to paint humanity as this awful thing. You know, we're mixed. It's the good and bad and the ugly. So I don't want to be misunderstood as trying to be anti-human or anything. I'm not. I'm saying that we know that we will do anything to anybody, even in spite of what you've said, right? And that's what's so disturbing. Of course, these women were screaming in pain. And of course, these people are telling the officers who were interrogating them in these CIA blacks, I'm just using US as, I'm not anti-US, okay? The United States did not invent torture. People do this all over the world. It's about humanity. It's not about a nation state. I'm just saying that even today, very sophisticated, highly educated, elite, professional people continue to deny this recognition.
Let me ask a question about robots and not about people. Robots are built by companies. For example, there's a robot by Honda. It's called Averroës. And Honda could have designed it in all sorts of ways. It could have designed it so that it had empathy, or so that it killed people. It could do all sorts of things. In fact, there are robot soldiers nowadays. You can ask questions about that. But who do you hold responsible? So let's say that Averroës walks in and does some damage to people in this room or to the car or whatever you like. Who do you hold responsible? You don't hold Averroës responsible. You hold Honda responsible. You hold the designer, the maker. So there's a class of people we want to call the responsible authorities, who in fact are the people you would actually hold, you would actually deal with. Now, there isn't such a thing with people. That is, except God made us all, but there is no maker above us. I mean, there are people who force us to do things, but contract with us to do things. But it's not like a robot that actually is a machine and was designed and built by. I was wondering, how do you respond to that issue?
Yeah, thank you. That's you know, these are all such great, amazing questions. Yes, it is. the best one. No, these are all great questions. So I don't have an ultimate answer to that, but I will say in 2016, so in 2016, what we now call the Alphabet company, then it was Google. They make these autonomous cars. Waymo is a subsidiary. And in order to commercialize the car, which is what they want to do eventually, because they're pouring billions of dollars into our research and development, to commercialize the car, you have to meet these standards of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. For example, the brake has to be accessible to a driver. If you went to buy a new car and you couldn't reach the steering wheel and there was no way for you to activate the turn signal because the turn signal was in the trunk, that'd be ridiculous. That'll never happen. No one could ever commercialize that car. It has to meet these standards. Well, Waymo is developing these fully autonomous cars. They're actually designing cars where there would not be any humans in the driver's seat. Humans wouldn't do any driving at all. And it would be only the car. And in order to be able to legally sell it in the United States, they had to get permission from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration so that they could still meet the standard that the controls for driving are accessible to the driver. Okay, so they asked the federal government, will you recognize the driver as the car? Will you recognize the car as being the driver legally? Okay? And the federal government came back in 2017. So they asked in October 2016, the federal government came back in February 2017 and wrote this big thing. And they said, yes, absolutely. Now, if you understand anything about what's happening in the larger world of military industrial states and the need for sophisticated AI technology and not wanting to put the damper on that, you can begin to appreciate pretty quickly. There are all kinds of reasons why the federal government might want to do things that will allow these companies to be able to commercialize all this R&D that they're developing. But the point is that for the first time, a category that had been previously limited to biological humans being the driver was applied to a non-human machine entity, the car. And what that means is that at a practical level, once you say the car is the driver, that triggers all kinds of legal consequences. It doesn't mean that companies no longer have any responsibility, but it does mean that if we have laws in this country that dictate consequences for drivers when drivers do certain things. And if you, well, it could be hacked. It could be hacked, if not drunk. But the point is that we already have an example of a nation state government with regulatory frameworks. I don't mean this cynically, but the slippery slope has already begun. And I don't mean that negatively. I'm not saying under no conditions should any machines ever be seen as having some kind of decision agency. But the point is that's already going to happen because of that legal framework, that at least for some purposes, in some instances, the agent, okay, and so we can say intention for practical reasons. Once you say it's the driver, you have to then presume that the driver can actually make decisions about and decide to do certain things, which does not mean that companies don't have responsibility necessarily, but does mean that it's not just the company. Now it's also created this quandary where the machine gets implicated in terms of who the causal agent is. So that's one example. I do think it's important that companies be held responsible, that they not escape and say, oh, it's just our machine, you know, it's Asimov did it all themselves, it wasn't us. There needs to be company responsibility, but we're already on this road to recognizing agency in a legal sense. You know, it doesn't have to be theological but in a legal sense and ethically in a machine entity, which definitely complicates things. It's a great question.
We have one last time for Ashley.
Oh no, lots of pressure. Yeah, so I think I find it easy to think about that, like perhaps robots can feel pain or that they have some sort of semblance of personhood when I think about them as separate from ourselves.
Yes.
But the place where I have a lot more trouble and maybe concern is when I think about them like human-machine hybrids. Mm-hmm. Machines are part of us. And part of why I pose this is because when we think about abortion policy, that the idea that a fetus can feel pain, mm-hmm. A fetus has personhood is used to restrict.
That is correct. That is correct. Yes. Yes.
And I think that's an area where I'm like, if we posit that robots feel pain, that robots maybe have personhood, mm-hmm. What happens when they're part of us and our rights are in conflict?
Yeah, this is another great point, because this problem of legal personhood has been worked out. I don't mean it's been finalized. I mean, it's been, you know, it's poked, prodded, elaborated, and adjudicated with respect to fetuses, to enslaved entities, to corporations. You know, corporations are legally recognized as persons, as legally fictive persons. And those three examples already show us that there is a history of recognizing personhood in very complicated ways that raise all kinds of questions. And your question, I thought we had the best question. This is the best. All great questions, but this raises another complexity. And it is very true that particularly given recent developments in the US, and as many other countries in the world are legalizing or decriminalizing abortion, for example, in order to safeguard the ability of women to be able to have agency over their own reproductive capacities. What we are seeing quite vociferously in the United States is the very opposite. So this is not just a hypothetical question. This is a very, very important and urgent one that has tremendous implications for these machine systems. And would it be, I mean, I'm just gonna, I don't mean this cynically, but if someone wanted to undermine the ability of women to be able to control their own capacities and had implants, this could be one way to do that. Well, let's recognize more rights in these machine systems, and then we can continue to chip away at this thing. It have implications for people who are not women as well. But it just demonstrates the importance and the relevance of what you're raising. And this is why, I'll end on this note, this is why we need to include humanists and the governance of technology, because it's not just technical questions. We need people who have an expert, sophisticated understanding of the human, what we call the human condition. And so the great work that SESTA is doing, that the Stanford Humanities Centers is doing, and that these different humanistic disciplines are doing, is actually incredibly urgent in our technological moment, because it's not just technical. You know, the technical dimensions are important, they're complicated, they're urgent, and so are these other areas. And that's why we have to have humanists who are participating in the leadership of the governance of technology. So thank you again for this invitation. I really appreciate your comments and questions. Thank you.